Ever wonder if the king of rock and roll was sometimes outshined by his own backup singers? Did Elvis Presley's legendary voice occasionally take a backseat to the spectacular harmonies supporting him? Number 8. How Great Thou Art, 1966. Did you know Elvis won his first Grammy not for rock and roll, but for gospel music? When Elvis recorded How Great Thou Art in 1966, something magical happened in RCA's Studio B in Nashville. The Imperials Quartet and the Jordanaires provided such powerful backing vocals that many listeners found themselves mesmerized by the gospel group's harmonies rather than Elvis's lead. During this recording session, Elvis was reportedly in a deeply spiritual mood. The session began late in the evening and continued into the early morning hours. The backing vocalists, who had worked with Elvis for years, created a wall of sound so rich and textured that producer Felton Jarvis had trouble balancing the mix. One of the quartet members later recalled, "Elvis kept telling us to sing louder, to really let go. He wanted that big church sound." The result was a backing vocal arrangement so powerful that it nearly swallowed Elvis's voice at certain moments, particularly in the climactic final verse where the backing vocalists build to a crescendo of "How Great Thou Art" that sends shivers down listeners' spines. Radio Jess, at the time, often commented on the backing vocals specifically when playing the track, noting how the support singers created what one Memphis radio host called a heavenly choir effect. The recording went on to win the Grammy for Best Sacred Performance in 1967, with several critics specifically mentioning the backing vocals in their reviews. While Elvis delivered a heartfelt performance, many fans and critics agree that the backing vocalist's contribution elevated this track to a transcendent level. Number 7. Suspicious Minds, 1969. Ever heard those soaring harmonies that make Suspicious Minds so unforgettable? This 1969 hit marked Elvis's triumphant return to the top of the charts after years of movie soundtracks. But the backing vocals provided by the Sweet Inspirations and the Imperials became almost as iconic as the song itself. During the American Sound studio sessions in Memphis, producer Chips Mommen insisted on using both vocal groups to create a distinctive sound. The Sweet Inspirations, an all-female group that included Whitney Houston's mother, Cissy Houston, brought a soulful gospel-influenced sound that perfectly complemented Elvis's emotional delivery. The backing vocalists' repetition of "We're Caught in a Trap" and their ascending parts became signature elements of the recording that many fans sing along with rather than Elvis's lead vocal. Studio engineer Al Pachucki recalled having to repeatedly adjust the mix because the backing vocals were so powerful they threatened to overshadow Elvis's voice. Music historian Peter Guralnick noted in his Elvis biography that during playback in the studio, Elvis himself seemed stunned by how the backing vocals had transformed the track. "Play that part again," he reportedly said, referring to the bridge where the Sweet Inspirations vocals soar behind his own. Radio stations received calls from listeners asking specifically about the female singers on the track. One Memphis DJ even started playing a version where he'd adjusted the mix to highlight the backing vocals even more. When Elvis performed the song during his 1970 Las Vegas shows, audiences often cheered loudest when the backing vocalists hit their high harmony parts, something that reportedly both amused and slightly annoyed the king. Number 6. In the Ghetto, 1969. Can social commentary in a pop song be made more powerful by backing vocals? In the Ghetto, Elvis delivered one of his most poignant performances. but it's the subtle, haunting backing vocals that many listeners find most emotionally affecting. Recorded during the same American Sound Studios sessions that produced Suspicious Minds, this Mac Davis-penned song featured the sweet inspirations and the Imperials creating a sorrowful, almost mournful backdrop to Elvis's storytelling. The backing vocalists employed a technique where they deliberately stayed just behind the beat, creating a dragging, weighted feeling that perfectly captured the song's themes of poverty and hopelessness. Mary Holiday, one of the backing vocalists, later revealed in an interview, "We were told to sound sad, to think about the lyrics and what they meant. We weren't just singing notes, we were trying to convey the struggle of the people in that ghetto." This emotional connection comes through clearly, particularly in the sections where the backing vocalists echo the phrase "in the ghetto" with a descending melody line that sounds like a collective sigh. The song's producer, Chips Moman, specifically highlighted the backing vocals during mixing, creating what he called a halo effect around Elvis's voice. This production choice resulted in moments where the backing singer's harmonies wrap around Elvis's voice like a sorrowful embrace, sometimes becoming the most emotionally resonant element in the mix. Music critics at the time noted this effect, with Rolling Stone's original review of the song mentioning how the backing singers provide a Greek chorus effect, commenting on the tragedy as it unfolds. Radio programmers reported that listeners would call in specifically moved by what one program director called those haunting voices in the background. The backing vocals became so integral to the song's identity that when other artists cover In the Ghetto, they typically recreate the backing vocal arrangement almost exactly. Number 5. An American Trion, 1972. How do you turn a medley of traditional American songs into an epic showcase for backing vocalists? Elvis's live version of An American Trio demonstrates exactly that. With backing vocals that build to such a powerful crescendo, they frequently drew louder applause than Elvis himself. This medley of Dixie, All My Trials, and the Battle Hymn of the Republic became a staple of Elvis's concert performances in the 1970s. While Elvis's dramatic delivery anchors the performance, the J.D. Sumner and the Stamps Quartet backing vocals transform it into something approaching theatrical spectacle. During the Battle Hymn of the Republic segment, J.D. Sumner hits a famous low note on the line, "His truth is marching on," that was often cited in the Guinness Book of World Records as the lowest note ever recorded by a human voice. This moment became so anticipated by audiences that they would often break into applause mid-song when Sumner hit the note, sometimes drowning out Elvis's next line. Charlie Hodge, Elvis's friend and stage assistant, recalled, "Sometimes Elvis would just step back and let the boys shine. He knew how much the audience loved that big finish with all the harmonies going crazy." Concert recordings from this period clearly capture audiences erupting when the backing vocalists hit their stride in the song's final third. The arrangement of An American Trion strategically positions the backing vocalists in increasingly prominent roles as the song progresses, until by the final choruses, they're creating a wall of sound that rivals Elvis in both volume and emotional impact. Elvis biographer Peter Guralnick noted that this was one of the few songs where Elvis seemed content to share the spotlight, writing that he seemed to take as much pleasure in the audience's reaction to the backing vocals as to his own performance. During Elvis's famous Aloha from Hawaii global satellite concert in 1973, the camera operators were specifically instructed to feature the backing vocalists during key moments of An American Trion, acknowledging their crucial role in the performance. When the concert was later released as a live album, several reviews specifically praised the backing vocalists, with Variety noting that the backing singers often steal the show, particularly during the patriotic medley. Number 4. Always on My Mind, 1972. Can guilt and regret be better expressed through harmony than melody? In Elvis's heartbreaking rendition of Always on My Mind, recorded shortly after his separation from Priscilla Presley, the backing vocals add layers of melancholy that many listeners find even more emotionally affecting than Elvis's lead. The Voice, a vocal group featuring Cheryl Nielsen, created gossamer-like harmonies that float behind Elvis's voice like whispered regrets. Producer Felton Jarvis made the unusual decision to record the backing vocals in a separate session after Elvis had completed his part, allowing the vocalists to specifically craft their harmonies to complement Elvis's emotional delivery. Nielsen later revealed, "We were told about Elvis's personal situation and asked to sing with that in mind. It wasn't just about the notes on the page, it was about capturing that feeling of looking back on love with regret." This approach resulted in backing vocals that seemed to comment on Elvis's performance, adding emotional subtext with their gentle, almost ghostly quality. The most striking moment comes during the bridge, where the backing vocalists sustain long, ethereal notes, while Elvis sings about opportunities missed and love neglected. Many listeners report finding this section particularly moving, with some even suggesting that the backing vocals express emotions that Elvis himself seems unable to fully articulate. Music journalist Dave Marsh wrote in his review of the song that the backing vocalists function almost as Elvis's conscience, their heavenly harmonies suggesting the emotional depth that his somewhat detached delivery only hints at. Radio jazz in the early 1970s often commented specifically on the backing vocals when introducing the song, with one famous disc jockey describing them as the sound of heartbreak itself. When the song was featured in a documentary about Elvis's later years, the film's editor chose to isolate and heighten the backing vocals during a montage of Elvis and Priscilla, recognizing their emotional power. The backing vocals on this track have influenced generations of producers, with country musicians in particular often citing this arrangement as the perfect example of how supporting vocals can enhance a song's emotional impact. Number 3. Burning Love, 1972. What happens when backing vocalists create a hook more memorable than the lead vocal? In Burning Love, Elvis delivered one of his most energetic latter-day performances, but it's the backing vocalists who created this song's most identifiable element. The repeated "hunka hunka burning love" backing vocal phrase has become so iconic that it's often what people immediately think of when the song is mentioned. The Nashville edition provided these backing vocals, creating a call and response effect that gives the song its distinctive character and energy. Recording engineer Mike Moran later revealed that this now famous vocal hook was actually somewhat improvised during the session. The guys were just messing around with that hunka hunka echo during a break, and producer Felton Jarvis heard it and said, "That's it, let's use that." This spontaneous addition became the song's defining feature, with radio DJs often singing along specifically to this part when introducing the track. The backing vocalist's energy seems to push Elvis to one of his most committed vocal performances of the 1970s. There's a playful competition, audible in the recording, with Elvis seeming to feed off the backing vocalist's enthusiasm. Guitarist James Burton, who played on the session, recalled, "Everyone in the studio was grooving on what the backing singers were doing. It had this great bounce to it that lifted the whole track." During mixing, Jarvis made the unusual decision to push the backing vocals almost as loud as Elvis's lead in certain sections, creating moments where the voices seemed to function as equal partners rather than lead and support. This approach created one of Elvis's most dynamic latter-day recordings, with the energy constantly shifting between Elvis and his backing singers. In concert performances of Burning Love, Elvis would often gesture to his backing vocalists when it was time for the hunka-hunka part, acknowledging that this moment belonged to them. Audiences would frequently sing along specifically with the backing vocal parts, sometimes even drowning out Elvis himself. This phenomenon became so common that Elvis occasionally feigned jealousy on stage, joking that he was being upstaged by his own backup singers. Number 2. Polk Salad Annie, Liv Verdens, 1970 to 1977. How can backing vocalists transform a simple blues song into theatrical spectacle? The studio version of Polk Salad Annie was fairly straightforward, but in concert, Elvis turned it into an extended showcase for his backing vocalists that often overshadowed his own performance. In his Las Vegas shows and touring concerts of the 1970s, Elvis would stretch Polk Salad Annie into a 7 to 8 minute performance piece, with extended sections featuring the Sweet Inspirations, J.D. Sumner and the Stamps, and Kathy Westmoreland trading vocal riffs and creating a gospel-influenced call and response pattern that audience went wild for. Concert recordings from this period reveal moments where the backing vocalist's parts drew louder applause than Elvis's singing, particularly during sections where J.D. Sumner would hit his famously low bass notes, or when the Sweet Inspirations would deliver soulful improvisations. Elvis concert regular Patrick Simpson recalled, "Sometimes Elvis would just stand there looking amused, while the Stamps or Sweet Inspirations did their thing. The crowd would go crazy for those vocal gymnastics." Elvis's backing vocalist, Cheryl Nielsen, later explained, "Elvis loved giving us the spotlight. He'd often tell the audience, 'Listen to this,' before one of us would do a solo part. This generous approach created concert moments where the backing vocalists became co-stars rather than support with their elaborately arranged features, sometimes lasting longer than Elvis's own verses. The arrangement evolved over the years, with Elvis continuously finding new ways to showcase his backing vocalists during the song. By the mid-1970s, Polk Salad Annie had essentially become a mini-concert within the concert, with each backing vocalist getting their moment to shine. Concert reviewers frequently highlighted these segments, with the Los Angeles Times noting in 1975 that the backing singers nearly stole the show during an extended version of Polk Salad Annie that had the audience on its feet. Elvis's willingness to share the spotlight in this way was unusual for a superstar of his magnitude, but it created some of the most dynamic moments in his live shows. Footage from these concerts shows Elvis beaming with pride during his backing vocalists' features, genuinely delighting in their talent. This approach transformed Polk Salad Annie from a relatively minor song in Elvis's catalog to a concert highlight that fans eagerly anticipated. Number 1. Bridge Over Troubled Water, 1970. Could Elvis's cover of a Simon and Garfunkel classic be most remarkable for the voices supporting him? When Elvis recorded Bridge Over Troubled Water in 1970, he delivered a powerful vocal, but the arrangement gave unprecedented prominence to his backing vocalists. The Imperials and the Sweet Inspirations created such a rich tapestry of harmonies that producer Felton Jarvis faced a dilemma during mixing. Studio logs indicate that Jarvis spent an unusual amount of time balancing the vocals, trying to ensure Elvis remained the focus while still footing the exceptional backing vocal arrangement. The most striking moment comes during the song's emotional climax, where the backing vocalists build to a crescendo that matches Elvis in both volume and intensity. Unlike most pop recordings where backing vocals are mixed to clearly support rather than compete with the lead, this arrangement creates moments where the voices blend into a collective expression of emotion, with Elvis functioning almost as part of an ensemble rather than its clear star. Gospel music historian Anthony Halbut observed, "This recording shows Elvis's gospel roots in full flower. The backing vocalists aren't just supporting him, they're having a musical conversation with him, responding to his phrases with their own emotional statements." This approach creates a recording that feels more like a gospel performance than a pop song, with the line between lead and backing vocals deliberately blurred. Elvis himself recognized the special nature of this recording. In a rare interview comment about his own work, he mentioned Bridge Over Troubled Water as a personal favorite, specifically noting how the voices all come together at the end. This appreciation for the collective vocal effect, rather than his own performance, speaks to Elvis's musical sensibility and his genuine respect for his backing vocalists. Radio stations reported that listeners would call in specifically to comment on the backing vocals in this recording. One program director noted, people would request the song and then add something like, "I love how all the voices blend together at the end. It wasn't just about Elvis for them." The recording's arrangement influenced numerous gospel and soul artists, establishing a template for how backing vocals could be used to create emotional crescendos. When Elvis performed the song during his 1970 Las Vegas engagement, the backing vocalist received a separate round of applause after the song concluded, something almost unheard of for backing musicians. Concert reviewer Mike Khalil wrote at the time, "While Presley's rendering of Bridge Over Troubled Water was passionate, it was the backing singers who brought tears to eyes throughout the showroom with their gospel-tinged harmonies." Did Elvis mind sharing the spotlight with his backing vocalists? Or did he recognize that sometimes the sum could be greater than even his legendary parts? What do you think made the king so willing to let others shine alongside him when so many stars insist on standing alone?